speak to Dr. Joelle Grogan now, who's a senior researcher at the academic think tank UK in a Changing Europe. Hello there.
Good morning.
Morning. Okay, so these amendments then at the House of Lords, can you just talk us through what it is they were aiming to do?
Certainly. So the important thing to remember about the bill itself is that it says Rwanda is a safe country, and no court, no immigration officer anywhere in the UK can say anything except Rwanda is a safe country. So the amendments that we saw very large defeats on last night were very much aiming towards, rebutting or stopping that putting in law that Rwanda is safe. So one of the big ones was that courts can consider evidence to the contrary, saying, Rwanda is not actually a safe country. It also puts in law that the safeguards that were promised in the treaty with Rwanda have to be in operation before anyone can be sent to Rwanda. Another very interesting, if not quite unusual amendment that we saw was that the legislation has to comply with British law and international law. It's very strange to see a piece of legislation that says, I have to also abide by the law.
And all this being said then, how likely is it to actually have an impact? It all goes back to the Commons now.
Ultimately, it's unlikely any of these amendments are going to stay as part of the bill. So it's going to go back to the Commons. Because the government have a large majority in the Commons, we're likely to see all the amendments being voted down. It will go back to the Lords, but it's unlikely that we'll see any great ping pong or passing very quickly of the bill between the Lords and the Commons. Labour has already said that it is not going to block the bill. The Lords could delay it up to a year, up to the next election, but it's very, very unlikely that we'll see that.
In terms of the principle of this, then we were speaking earlier to a Lord who's put his name to amendments, who is saying that it's not necessarily the principles of this, but it is this ruling that Rwanda was not a safe country that was the big thing for him. Is there any way you think that the Lords will have any impact at all on that? He said that if there could be, it could be proven that it had become a safe country, then it would go ahead. Would the government, would the Commons accept any of those amendments, do you think, or unlikely?
It's certainly very, very significant and powerful words that we're hearing from the Lords. This is some of the largest government defeats in the Lords that we've seen in recent times. There were very strong arguments about the rule of law, the importance of the British Constitution, about human rights, about the UK complying with its international obligations and what this could mean for the UK. But ultimately, we see that this is a promise of the government. This is one of Rishi Sunak's 5 priorities, get planes off the ground. So it's unlikely that we're going to see that convincing anyone in the Commons.
So if it becomes law then, as it could within a month, do you see the first flights actually taking off before, we don't have the date for it yet, but before the general election?
We could plausibly see it if they're able to find planes and an airfield. I think there was also indication that it would also be up to Rwanda as to when they wanted or were able to start accepting people into the country. I think something else to keep in mind is the numbers of people actually involved in the Rwanda policy. So initial estimates were saying about 200 people over the course of 5 years. I think from the National Audit Office on the beginning of March, they were talking about the numbers of 300 over the course of a few years. We could see planes taking off, again, if those practical challenges are met. But in absolute terms, this is always going to be a very, very small number of people.
But I guess significant politically.
Incredibly significant politically. Not only in terms of a piece of legislation that is enshrining permanently a fact saying Rwanda is safe, nothing and no one can say otherwise, but also what this could mean for future developments, not only here in the UK, but for a lot of other European countries that are looking at the UK and thinking, is this something that we want to consider too?